Okay, I'm going to call the planning board meeting for Wednesday, October 17, 2018 to order at 7 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, let's see. Richard Sparks, Vice
Here.
Chair. Mike Carpenter is not here. Is Mike Carpenter coming? As far as we know?
Here.
Okay.
I did not hear.
Franz Horacio.
Here.
Anthony Renzi.
Here.
Jeff Sheldon.
Here.
Let's see, also present are staff Jennifer Siciliano, planner, Joanna Achille, attorney, people whose names are on the sign-in sheet, including Bill Lawson and Sandy Sheldon, and town council members Gordon Rogers and Denise DeFranco, and also Planning Board Chair Joe Carey, and me, Secretary Ellen Murray. Who did I miss?
Gail Lawson.
Gail Lawson.
She did mention her.
Oh, she did, I'm sorry.
Thank
There you go.
See, you don't listen, right?
I listen pretty good.
Okay, we move on to the minutes for September 19th. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion that we approve the minutes from September 19th.
Okay, have a second?
Oh,
Second.
is there going to be discussion?
Yeah, we'll have discussion if we get a second. Okay, have a discussion.
Just one mistake I found on the first page. It had me speaking for the land trust and Mike speaking for the conservation commission.
Oh, I didn't get that. Oh, thank you. So it's just the,
Yeah, just switch them around. That's it.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes 6-0. Okay, take a motion for minutes of October 3rd.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes from October 3rd.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Anthony. Okay, discussion? Everybody get a chance to review these? And they came up yesterday. Get a chance to look at it now?
I did look at them, thank you.
Any
And
discussion?
I did not, of course, I didn't check to see who was reporting on land trust.
I don't think we had this
Who was
one.
reporting on conservation, but,
It was not present.
right, okay. And so, as far as I could see, there were no corrections.
Okay, all in favor of the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, passes 6-0. All right. Okay, we got correspondence. Do we have any correspondence?
No, we do not.
Okay. Anything from the board? Okay, old business, the
Oh.
service awards.
Okay. We're not gonna, yeah. I thought I was gonna.
I'll make a motion to add reports from the board members to the, from the land trust and,
Okay, we can do
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
yeah,
I didn't realize it was.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, second. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I actually have the report
Yeah.
tonight.
Yeah, we just
Okay,
changed the
okay.
format where we were gonna do the reports on the first meeting from now on. because-
Okay. Would you?
But you can do it,
Okay.
since you have it, it's fine.
Okay, we got Monday night, 6 or 7 members attended, including myself, plus myself. Veronica Hines, Nikki resigned, saying she was overextended. And then Ed Chernow came to the meeting. He just finished hiking the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada, 2,500 miles. It took him 5 months. He's interested in joining the Conservation Commission.
He was on it previously.
Yeah, it was.
And what was his name, please?
I'll give you this if you want.
Yes.
Ed Chernow.
Ed.
His name is Ed Chernow, S-H-E-R-N-A-U. I don't know if I pronounced it. I advised the members of tonight's planning board meeting and the agenda and pointed out specific items like solar that they might be interested in. I don't think anyone showed that here. They developed a new mission statement for inclusion on their website. Do you want me to read it, or would you rather just see it on their website?
Well, I'd like to see it on the website.
Okay.
Yes.
It may actually be revised because after the
See, then let's wait for the website final.
So the Conservation Commission is looking into how they can be more proactively engaged in fulfilling the mission and responsibilities under the town charter. I'm going to read the section 905 of the town charter Conservation Commission. It says there shall be a Conservation Commission which shall act in an advisory capacity to the town council in all matters concerning the following: wetlands planning and mapping, environmental planning, open space planning, preservation of farmlands, erosion control, gravel and loam stripping control, and such other areas of study as may be requested by the planning board. So they're kind of wondering, why they exist and what they should be doing. And I've been on the planning board, I think, for 3.5 years, and we've never requested their opinion or input on any of these things. So, and they're looking for, I guess they're looking for just the planning board or the town council to reach out to them or provide some guidance on how they should be fulfilling their responsibilities under the charter.
Yeah, I think Ed and Brendan had come out when we were doing the solar on Route 6, the first one. They had come out on the sidewalk from the Conservation Commission. We had reached out to them on that.
May I, in that regard, you're our representative, you go there, you tell them there's a solar meeting, and then it's their responsibility to come here and send us a proposal.
Well, I don't know if it is.
Well, I mean, that's the normal way this would, that's one way it could possibly help. Instead of having another layer of bureaucracy, we get something else. But I'm sorry to interrupt.
Are you done?
Yeah, that's it, that's all I have to
All right.
say.
I know they used to do that quite a bit already. But they haven't.
They're kind of wondering
Well,
why
they
they
haven't
exist.
had a board for quite a while, that's why I think so people are used to them actually having a forum at a meeting. So probably it's more, it kind of fell off, Mike arrived at 7:07. Mike Carpenter.
Apologies, everyone, I
Yep.
can use my new medication.
Well, it's good to see you.
Can we
See, you retire and then you need medication. That's supposed to work.
I thought that was your new medication.
Opposite way for me.
Jeff, I picked up your package if you want.
Thanks. My print.
Okay, well, you're just in time, Mike.
Yes.
Next thing on the agenda is service awards for volunteer town board. And I think this is your idea, Mike? We're prepared to speak on it tonight. If you want to say a few words about
I
it.
just
Just
thought
get settled in.
I thought the letter was right on spot on as far as, how we presented it to the council. And
Okay.
it should be really up to the council, I think, everything.
Right.
When we say how we do it and how it's done, but it should be something that, happens only because we're always trying to get new people on boards and commissions and recognition historically is what matters most to folks. So, thank you for that nice letter.
Okay, so I'd ask for a motion to send a letter about the awards for
So moved.
members to the council.
Second.
Second, President, any discussion on that? Jeff, did you have
I'd
something?
like to look at the letter and see what's written.
It's, the letter was in the last packet, so I
was
didn't
just looking
reprint it.
for
As written then?
I do have a copy of it. You know what I didn't put though? The last sentence, I did not say to be read out loud at the meeting.
We can request,
You can-
I'll be at the meeting.
You'll be there? Okay.
So I'll just request that they read it when I'm there.
Okay.
So we have to come for it, I think that would.
Okay.
All right. Did you have the copy of the
I
letter?
do. Do you want me to read it?
Is it short?
It's very short.
Yeah, why don't you read it, and everybody
Sure.
knows what's inside. I
Sure.
don't remember exactly what it
To
said.
the Honorable Town Council President and Town Council, the Planning Board recommends that the Town Council officially recognize members of the public who volunteer their time to serve on the town's various boards. The nature of this recognition, we leave up to the Town Council to consider. Some ideas include awarding these members with certificates of distinction and/or have had a celebration or meal. We feel that by thoughtfully thanking and publicly appreciating these many board volunteers, this will encourage members to continue serving on these boards and inspire other community members to offer their help to sit on these town boards as well.
You're gonna have merit badges like the Boy Scouts?
It's up to them.
Yeah, I want to add that.
I think you have specials. It's like stripes.
All right, let's cookies, let's go.
Okay, all right, so is there any discussion on the letter? You happy with that? Helen?
Just to, I think everybody is aware of this, but the Foster Preservation Society has for the last couple of years had a dinner or a lunch or meal, excuse me, I'm not even quite sure what it is, for people who serve various capacities in the town, including on boards.
Is that the clergy
No, preservation,
or preservation?
foster
I
preservation.
know the clergy association did it a couple of years, they had a picnic over
It may
at Town Grounds. It wasn't this year, they didn't do it, they had for 2 years previous. Okay, any further discussion?
No, I make a motion to accept the letter. Second.
Right, all in favor?
Aye.
Both passes 7-0. Did you write that, Mike?
I'll let you know.
Okay, we're moving on to zoning, we have,
Just one second. We're going quickly tonight.
the ball game tonight.
Yeah,
I missed one last
I
one.
meant to move to adjourn at 8:45, or sooner if we got all of our business done first. But I forgot.
So the first thing, all right, budget. I'm just gonna read the agenda.
Okay.
All right, we have an advisory opinion for section 38-292 for solar installations. This was requested by the council to revisit the solar ordinance and possibly suggest some amendments. There's a staff report here by Jennifer that we've all gotten. Did you want to just go over it quick?
Sure. So the town council asked us, the planning board, to look at the solar installation zoning ordinance and some of the issues that were coming up by residents and alike. I gave some ideas of what could be changed, and then getting information from you, I can change it and then present it to the town council, which I probably will go to that meeting at town council. But some of the changes could be to prohibit certain use, to prohibit the installations in certain districts, or increase like vegetated buffer. Right now, it's only 20 feet, maybe we could make it 100 or something like that. There's a requirement for putting a bond for decommissioning the solar installation, but a lot of people were talking about landscaping or possible issues that might happen with wells or street flooding, which I've heard. I haven't talked to Richmond, but I heard that in Richmond they had some issues. So maybe we could look to increase bonding, or create a maximum coverage, because we do right now have a 3% building coverage, and that is a building coverage, it's not the solar array coverage. So right now, there's no maximum on the solar array, so we could do something like 30% or whatever you feel like. You could also additionally require the town council to provide approval. So my recommendation, I don't think you really need to stop it from being any certain district, because you already have,
Districts.
you already have the planning board, the zoning board looking at every single thing. But it's up to you about the town council, it'll be up to the town council whether they want to. But right now, the town council voted to have the solar applicants come before them, but it's not really binding in terms of zoning. Like, you really have to go, there's a time limit on when you need to see applications, and that's still gotta go forward.
Can I make a request on that subject?
Sure.
And that is, can we ask Joanna if she will please look at the charter and see, you know, whether that is in the purvey review, whatever probably is the right word, whether that's the domain of the planning board and the zoning board, or whether it is also in the domain of the town council. Can you look and see?
I can.
Because I do believe that there are a couple of things that are in the charter which say that the planning board recommends ordinances, it recommends zoning ordinances, and the council approves them. But I don't believe the council has, I think if they can either approve, disapprove, or send it back, but I don't think that they, but can you check and see whether
Yes.
they can also rewrite?
Helen, excuse me, are you saying you don't believe they have
Just comes in
first
front of
say?
us for public to see.
They have authority.
That
I'm
wasn't
just
right.
asking Jennifer if.
I know, but and I'm trying to
asking
simplify,
Joanna.
I'm trying to simplify your question. Are you
Yep.
asking, do they have first say? Which is,
No,
okay, all right, I asked you, answered, that's it.
okay.
I think.
And you're talking about the application,
I-
not the ordinance.
Right. I think she's talking about the charter,
I'm-
the powers of the town council.
I
Don't
get
allow
it.
them to get involved.
I
in
get,
zoning
that's why I
decisions.
asked, I said first say, but, you know,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
All right.
I think, you know, that's a very good point. I think, you know, that we do have a zoning board and a planning board, and, you know, I don't think it's really in the purview if there's an ordinance that the town council should be getting involved in decisions on zoning.
so
Seems
Jennifer,
like a conflict of interest.
Jennifer, and you said coverage, 3% permeable,
That's,
non-permeable.
no, that is just building coverage.
Okay, so
Mhm.
how would building coverage relate to solar farm coverage, since you haven't affected the soil and its ability to draw in water? And coverage is the domain of DEM, if I'm not mistaken. Because if they feel that coverage can't be too close to a stream, too close to ledge where there'll be runoff, and that's what they would do. So I don't know why we would, each site is different, and I don't know how we could put in a coverage thing that one size would fit all.
Well, you're saying the maximum coverage.
But why would we say that? That's my question
It would
is,
limit the amount.
but, okay, now,
Okay.
200 acres in the middle of the woods that nobody can see from any place, why would we limit the coverage?
Do we?
It's up to you, it's up to you.
That's what, so now I'm going back to one size. We're gonna come up with a coverage plan, and one size does not fit all. So I don't think coverage should be dealt with by the planning board. I think it's
Each individual site should be, maybe we have a standard to go by, but if you've got a 5 acre that everybody, I noticed you said agricultural residential, in 5 acres, and you're gonna go a maximum of 30%, and they can put 1.5 acres of solar farm. That kind of seems pretty good piece of a 5 acre parcel, 1.5 acres. So 30% on that would seem like a lot, but 30% on 200 acres doesn't seem like much. You know, so each individual, so like, for instance, the last one that came here, they expanded it, but then there was all kinds of wetland issues, and then they changed it. So I would think if we worked it per individual site, can we do that, or just have a scope of something?
That's why I'm asking that question.
Yeah, I think Richard sent me an email of two ideas. He did say, why don't we put an acreage limit or something like that. He also said about not cutting down trees, but that makes me hesitant because I know that people will anticipate that they're going to do that, so then they'll cut down the trees before they come before you. So that's.
Cut down the trees, say you're gonna build a cow pasture, all right?
Before you move on, I think Helen had a comment on what we were discussing earlier, but you want to better
In
finish your thought.
In the present zoning, it says if the major solar installation has an output of, if it's a big one, of greater than 250 kilowatts or exceeds 40% of the net buildable area of the lot on which it is located, then such a major solar installation shall require major land development approval from the planning board and especially permit from the zoning board, et cetera, which is it's already built in. We have already got an opportunity to
Address it. To do what?
I think
To address,
to,
To hold the limit of
well, we can
space.
put a condition on it that how big the solar, after
Yeah,
40%,
will be.
what we have in the building. It's built in there, there's a new building. So there is some discussion, something in the ordinance about coverage.
but maybe, people may not feel like that's enough.
Again, solar farms were designed to be put on brown fields, brown dirt, dumps, places where nothing would work, open fields that were already trees cut down, and that's where the farmers come in, open pastures, and their animals could still graze with the rolling solar farms on them, solar panels on them, okay? They were never designed to come in and clear cut a 30, 40, 50 acre piece, 10 acre piece, or whatever, solely for the profit of the person buying inexpensive land somewhere.
Thank you.
Was that?
Thank you.
Okay, we agree on something, right? But that's where it was supposedly supposed to be, not on a major commercial piece of property standing on the major highway or Route 6 or something of that nature. So if this town wants to maintain a rural character, I guess we need to address maybe some of those issues in that way. I guess if you, again, all around the landfill, which is where they belong, is where they're putting up solar farms on the property around there, which is all contaminated within a big, and they're putting windmills there too, so you'll probably see 5 or 6 windmills coming up. But again, that's my opinion on what we're doing, because I saw somewhere here so the farmer can make some money. How many big farms do we have here with pastures and stuff that the cow farmer or whatever farmer he is, I don't know what it is not making money that he would want to put solar panels on it?
We actually have had 2 applications from
Joe.
people, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead, Ellen, he can wait.
Thanks.
He's very patient.
Is it okay if I just,
It's a rebuttal.
It's not a rebuttal. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to rebut anything that Anthony said. But one of the installations that we approved had the solar panels and a sheep pasture and sheep graze underneath it, and they keep the vegetation down. We actually have recommended that for every, that's, you probably have heard me say, consider having sheep because it's such a good idea. I'm not so sure all animals would be appropriate. But in that case, yes, there are two in the same vicinity that have that same, that do that same thing. They have animals that graze underneath them.
That's cool.
And it keeps the, it provides income for the farmer, which is helpful. And it keeps the vegetation down under the solar panels, which is desirable. And just, we've got just a solar, array in our field, and the sheep graze under that. And do exactly that same thing. So anyway, so Anthony, good idea.
Yeah?
This isn't either one way or the other, but my understanding of our solar, or solar farms in general, is that they're considered farms. Any farm that you have, seems to me they can run the farm borderline to borderline with no impediments whatsoever. We've instituted some already, the fact that we have, frontage that has to be away from the road and all that. Now, I'm not saying I'm for that, but I'm saying that, are we trying to stay within that law, or are we not trying to stay within that law?
Well,
I don't believe it is a law.
I don't,
They're talking
I'm
about-
gonna ask the solicitor for an opinion on this. I don't believe that a solar installation is a farm. It doesn't fall into a description of
No,
a
it's not.
farm.
Agricultural.
I think
They
there's
are
been some people
discussing-
trying to make
Push
it
it, yeah.
farm, but at this point, I don't think it's been determined that it would be considered in the right to farm or any of that.
Maybe we should go down the list and see how people feel about each one of these things, since I have to write something.
Jeff is not done with his comment.
Oh, sorry.
And I'm trying to get to your letter you wrote to the council, so could we finish this little group first? Jeff?
The other end about solar farms
Sure.
is, we all have a thing about trees. We all want to save our trees. And we don't like these acres of blue. I'm still for a farmer that wants to use his land to make himself a buck. All right, having said that, it seems to me that we would want to consider wind turbines because you're only going to use a 25-foot square out of 19 acres. And the rest of it would still be wooded. Okay, so we can all sit around and say, no, we don't like wind turbines. They can produce as much power on a piece of property, and yet they're not going to cover the land the way solar farms do. And I think that should be considered, and I think we ought to readdress that problem.
We're discussing the solar tonight, as far as cutting down trees, I believe with a wind turbine to install it, they do have to clear quite a bit of area to build it and put it up.
Okay, all right.
We have done in the past. I'm just.
The planner wrote the council letter that this board never got. And this board is operating under the premise that cutting down trees is bad. She did a carbon report to the council that says cutting down trees and replacing them with solar farms is actually a plus for carbon footprint. So the tree thing is a visual perspective, okay? It is not, in reality, negative benefit to the space. Helen's comment of animals under the solar farm then does make it a farm. The way around all this stuff, and I think you should be aware of it, is you go to DEM and say you're going to cut down all the trees and you're going to bring cows in. You bring the cows in for 1 year and then you have a farm. and then the trees are gone, and you don't go through any of the stuff that these guys just went through coming here. And we're gonna see an application just like that, that I think 80 acres was cut down. So, if people don't know by now, any ordinance, law, or anything else you pass, business will get around it. And I just told you the biggest way to get around it, and our perspective of trees versus solar farms is bad, is actually good. So I think I'd like to see that letter from you, report to the board. Thank you.
I did write that letter. The only thing that concerns me that the letter talks about carbon capture and things like that, but I didn't mention, which I don't think I was asked about, is stormwater runoff. But, you know,
But that's-
that is a concern.
But that's what DEM does.
That's true.
Okay, there we go.
Now, this letter was discussed at the town council meeting.
Yes, I
Is this the
think,
letter that they read the night when they lived in the
Yes.
moratorium the first
yes,
time?
the first time.
Okay,
Yes,
so that's
the
right. I
letter
heard
that he
it,
meant.
I didn't hear it read at the meeting.
So what, you want to go down the list now. The council sent us this thing and said, do something. You think they would have sent us something and said, these are some things we've gone through, and maybe you want to relook at them. But let's go on and waste a lot of time now.
So the first thing I don't really think is maybe something, but it's up to the board. Do you want to prohibit them in certain
I'd like
districts?
to speak to that. I'm probably a minority opinion, but I would prohibit them in AR zones, major solar installations. Anyway, whatever we're doing may become moot anyway, because the legislature is entertaining legislation that will allow these things without any zoning restrictions in the cities and towns anyway. So whatever we do may not eventually matter. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why I don't like it. I mean, people live in Foster because we have forests. This is one of the reasons. I mean, we could, and as far as whatever calculation you use or these people use, we could cut down every tree on the planet, and it would be better for the planet. We have a dead planet. There's something wrong with the calculation. Don't interrupt me when I'm talking. Don't interrupt.
Sorry, I apologize.
I mean, you interrupt all the
I
time.
apologize to you, I'm
All
very
right,
sorry.
Greg, just continue, please.
I mean, it's a ripoff of taxpayers and ratepayers. It's a redistribution of wealth because it's just taking money from taxpayers and ratepayers and giving it to select people that develop these commercial facilities. Doesn't really add any value, because I know everyone thinks we're saving the planet, so how can you be against it? Because you'd be against saving the planet. And a lot of people believe that stuff. I don't believe it. So it's not economical. If it was, it's being done because the legislature has mandated this group, so-called green energy, and they've rigged the markets to make it profitable for people to develop these. And eventually, I think it'll be shown that this has been the wrong way to go. But I was glad Anthony mentioned that. I mean, when I wrote to you, I was talking about clay cuts and maybe about over a certain size. I'm not against cutting, trees down. I realize some trees have to get cut down, but to go in and cut down 200 acres and put solar panels, I mean, what's Foster going to look like? Is it going to be a solar array? I mean, what's that going to do to the local climate? And vegetation is important for runoff, for your air, for everything. And it's an industrial use in a residential area. It doesn't belong there. It's contrary to the comprehensive plan. It's not protecting our natural resources or the quality of life in the town. And so I would make a motion. I'm not going to make a motion because I probably won't get any support. I would bother AR zones.
Well, just, make suggestions. I don't think we need motions at this point. As far as that, in an AR zone, I think that it's possible. I wouldn't prohibit them in the AR zone myself completely. I think it was maybe the lot size would matter. I mean, obviously, if it's a large lot, you know, have something in, if you got 50 acres and you're gonna put up a 10-acre array or something, I mean, I don't think it's, I wouldn't wanna see the whole 50 acres be clear cut and have that, but I don't think it would be necessary to totally not allow it, you know. Mike?
Yeah. We've been on this subject often, on and off, obviously developed an ordinance in the best interest of the town. And what happens with alternate energy is we sometimes forget that it's extremely limited. And placement of alternate energy is extremely limited because the cost of connecting to the utility on a three-phase line is $70,000 per pole. And that doesn't count the modifications needed at the substation. Generating electricity with photovoltaic panels requires collecting low voltage DC current from up to 8,000 panels at 300 watts apiece. It does require a large footprint, which is usually about 1 megawatt per 4 acres. And for some perspective on that, a 1 megawatt diesel generator is about as big as this table. Okay? So there's a tremendous imbalance in terms of available energy and transporting energy. The most restrictive agency in the country, ISO, has to review and approve every solar application. And the utility has, we covered that, okay? We also covered the fact that the utility has rigid, detailed policies to follow. And what most of our concerns about town development and comprehensive plan goals about maintaining a rural character, the only roads that we have three-phase power on are Route 102, 101, and Route 6. Okay. And some spur roads, like the one out that used to service the old Nike site. So we did consider all this in developing the ordinance, which is why I'm pretty sure once it becomes a major development, which there was some concern about why does it have to be a major land development. I think a major land development coming before the planning board would take a step back and review all the reasons why this alternate energy should be located in a specific area and justified by the major land development. That would bring in all of the compliance requirements from the DEM, from compliance with the comp plan. And yes, it would be a case by case, making sure that the abutters were protected, that the town was protected, and that the project went forward in compliance with existing regulations. Would every planning board treat an application the same way and probably polling the members of the planning board or everybody feel the same way about alternate energy? I seriously doubt that. But I think if we reassure the council, okay, that we did consider all these things very, very seriously in developing the ordinance and moved everything over 250K into a major land development, I think that the armor that we put on major land development for all major land developments is sufficient to protect the town and make that ordinance effective. I apologize because I always talk too much, but I was trying to hold back until I could remind everybody here that I'm hearing no new concerns. I'm listening to the same concerns that we addressed in developing the ordinance and tried to frame that process to protect the town, be in compliance with the comp plan, and give us a chance. And unfortunately, what has changed since we drafted the ordinance was a state law that allowed us to tax a little more. And that's inevitable for all the reasons that Rick pointed out. There's a lot of political support for alternate energy, which is a good thing. Unfortunately, and as we all know, and there are businessmen here who know better than anybody, that if there's an opportunity, someone's gonna take advantage of it. And I've been involved in alternate energy from a manufacturing standpoint for years. And the folks who are jumping on board ahead of everybody else initially put their money in landfill gas. And there's a huge landfill gas to energy plant at the Rhode Island landfill. It's operated by investment bankers, okay? They're probably the most miserable people in the world to work with. But the reality is, if you construct, I think Ron's pointed this out, I know Anthony's pointed it out, there's an opportunity there. There are people in place that are gonna seize that opportunity. And going forward, we were aware of that. And we talked about it, and we hopefully have insulated ourselves the best we can, but there's always somebody that's gonna come up with I'm buying this to make a 40-acre cattle farm, clears the land,
No question.
and puts up the solar panels. But the thing I want everybody to keep in mind is that alternate energy in Foster is in conflict with commercial development, because where we have three-phase is the best place to have your business. Where people have to put these solar farms near three-phase, so they're inherently in competition with our plan to improve commercial development. Because we can't receive the tax revenue, they don't provide any employment, and there is a visual impact on the community, a huge visual impact.
Okay.
I'm sorry, again, I apologize for taking so long, but that's one
Can
quick.
I
Well, that was
just,
good.
I just want to make one quick comment to the
I
planner.
need a clarification
All right, I just
from
want-
Mike, please.
All right, I just think that one of the things, what I'm getting out of this, that Mike is suggesting that we have all major solar installations in the same boat, not just 40% of the net bill. So if they're over 250, they'll all require the major land development. So make a note of that, and then Helen, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah.
You said that each installation is strictly reviewed by the federal, could you tell me again what the
Oh,
was?
two agencies. ISO is the agency that controls the grid,
Okay,
and all utilities report to ISO. The best way I can explain that is everybody familiar with that enormous power plant on 390, right where the Attawagin Blueville
Yeah,
sign is? That's what we call a merchant plant, okay? That plant only comes online
When the usage is.
when ISO, who's under contract with those folks, says, we need 350 megawatts. At that point, they have to start up and produce 350 megawatts under their contract, and they're paid a premium rate for it. It's hard I know, it's really kind of, you see a power plant, but it's really not a power plant. It is a merchant plant. That's how people take advantage of the power demand that's created by our lifestyle. All of these merchant plants, all the way from New York City, all the way up through New Hampshire, are on the Tennessee Gas Pipeline for that reason. That's the only large enough available fuel source for those turbine engines that generate that power. So that's the essence of ISO. They're the folks who call up that additional power from all over the country to satisfy the grid requirements so we don't have an outage. So that's one of the regulatory agencies. Nothing happens without their approval. No one can enter the grid unless they approve of it.
You had it? Okay.
Ron?
All right, look, Mike has just framed the whole thing perfectly, okay? And I'm gonna, I'm gonna, so, solar farms, everything Mike has just said is good. I was sarcastic when I said to the council, they sent it here and didn't know what they were asking us to do, but review it, so we're reviewing it. But everything, the reason we're in the position as a town, the town of Foster, the reason we are in financial straits, the reason we have these discussions, whether it be windmills, solar farms, towers, remember the tower, Helen, the tower discussions, whether it be any business, we say the greatest thing Foster's come up with, keep Foster rural. Years ago I said, we're gonna keep Foster rural to the point where we strangle ourselves, which is where we are, and we get to the point where we have to accept anything we can to support the community. So, but when we have this discussion, Anthony, all right, everybody starts talking about keep Foster rural. I don't want to look at it, all right? The people came into the council meeting and said, oh God, it's in my neighborhood, I have to see it. We have done this to ourselves. The first thing that has to be done, and we've had this discussion, all right, to do things, is we have, how many zones? 3?
No, yeah.
Okay, we need many more zones to protect the community. Going back to,
Can we get back to?
yes, but to get to this, yes, to get to solar, all right, you need new zones to protect the town against solar, all right? And we talk about, we do these things in little pieces, solar, wind, this, that, it's all zoning. We must deal with rezoning the community, making it available for different businesses where we want it done. And Helen did that a while ago with general business, mixed use, mod, but all you did with that, and I'm not being critical, Helen, is allow some solar farm to go in that space, all right? Because we don't have another zone that says solar farms go here. So, keep Foster rural is the wrong discussion, zoning is the right discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you say
Just
something?
real quick, it won't be quick, but I'm gonna tell you what it is. Political, I don't really care, okay? Everybody's talking about alternate energy or whatever. All these solar farms and windmills, I don't see my electric bill going down, so that's crap, okay? There isn't enough money for the town, so to get $150,000 in tax revenue, which you and I know we need cash flow, and you're absolutely right, we need 10 solar farms. 10 solar farms in this town is gonna okay. Town council wanted to put a moratorium on it, correct? And then they got the kibosh.
I don't know that they wanted to, but somebody asked them to put it on, and
They-
it was
they-
determined that
okay.
they did not vote for it.
This is what, instead of the moratorium, they asked
Okay,
us to
so-
review the current.
It could be, I could get myself in trouble by saying what I'm gonna say, okay?
Never happened.
Right, so, me being the leader of the band of 3, or a member of the band of 3, if we take each and every solar farm that wants to come in front of us, and we just have a bigger standard of restrictions, if somebody wants to put a solar farm here. And I think a lot of the pushback on solar farms, and me personally, is what it looks like, okay? It's a thing of not in my backyard, and I have one in my backyard, okay? And I think what you have about another bond for the landscaping is wicked important, because everything died that they planted in my backyard, and we don't have a full-time planner, zoning official to go and make the phone calls, to call the company that said they would come back and put the vegetation in there. That was the first one we put in, so we didn't ask for any bonds or anything like that. So that one stinks, okay? The first and biggest one we put in the town, we put it there blind. There's no restrictions, you can't pick up the phone and call anybody and tell them to come back and do it because we don't have it on paper, okay? So I believe if we make the restrictions buffers, one of the band of threes came up with berms. If we did things of that nature and really made it, I won't say difficult, but a little more than what they want to come in and do to our town, if they're willing to do it, I think we should allow them to put it up. But if we're just going to allow them to come in, throw it up, and have it look like it does on Route 6 for $15,000 a year, and I know there's a politician out there running, I can't remember his name, but it brings in more than what the empty land would bring in. And with that, he had a math problem there, I couldn't figure it out. But what we have looking at is just, it shouldn't be like that, okay? That's why, I guess like you said, Rich, that's why we came here. So that solar farm could have been there when they said a 50-foot buffer and they measured it from a different spot. So the 50-foot turned into no feet, and that's why it looks like it does. And then everybody says, oh, that's ugly. Okay, we could have had them put, a thing that we missed is on the side of the Sunoco. Nobody even talked about putting vegetation on that side of the fence, and that's clear as day. So there are things we can do as a planning board to make it eye-appealing. And I think if you really can't see it, I don't think a lot of people would really matter about it. And I will tell you one thing about the ones that they're putting it that I never realized, but they have all nice grass on the ones up on near the landfill, and I never noticed the section of grass just below the solar panels is burnt. And then the rest of the grass is green. It comes to the next solar panel. So the sun reflects off it and throws some heat, and it's burning. Now, those are things no one's ever talked about, and no one's ever talked about 15, 20 years down the road, what's really gonna happen then. We're predicting and letting these people put in a bond of XYZ money, because they're telling us that's how much it's gonna cost to get rid of this stuff. But 20 years down the road, how do we know what it's really gonna cost to get rid of it? We're taking their word for it. So the bond should be a lot bigger, just in case. Just some ideas I'm throwing out there.
Can I speak to it, Anthony?
No.
No?
No.
I just want a few things, points and various points. I think that's part of what we're discussing as far as setbacks and, trying to increase the vegetated buffers and things, part of what the discussion is tonight. As far as 106, I think there was a lot of things that were supposed to be done that were in the plan that obviously the property or the business owner decided they were just gonna go ahead and do whatever they wanted. They were supposed to cut trees along Route 6 and they cut them all down, and there was nobody overseeing the project from the town to look at it before it got done. And once the trees are gone, obviously you know what happens, you can't replace them very easily. So there was problems with enforcement up there because we don't have anybody. And I don't think any of these installations should even cut a tree or do anything until it's totally staked out and they know exactly what trees they're cutting and where they're doing, so nothing like that happens again. As far as your other point, I think, what was the last thing you said that you wanted to do?
Bond?
The decommission.
Oh, the decommission, does that, is that adjusted for inflation?
I don't believe it is adjusted for inflation. It is set by
Yeah,
a
because
expert that they provide.
because they're talking a 20-year
Yeah.
lifespan, I think, there should be.
Yeah, but how do we know what it's really
Right,
gonna
I
cost
know.
20 years from now?
I know, that's
We're
what I'm
taking,
saying.
we're
But
taking
you
their
have to-
word,
yeah,
we're
right.
taking their word for, it's not expensive, the aluminum's gonna go up, it's gonna cost, it's gonna cost,
Part of the problem is that you have these experts who are opining on it, but nobody really knows because these haven't been around for that
Oh,
long.
yes.
So,
And the experts that are talking on it are in the pocket of the guy that's putting it
yes,
up.
Yes.
So, just money. Okay, let's talk about money. First, I'm gonna talk about buffers. A 100-foot buffer, you can see through in the winter. An 8-foot berm, which I got laughed at by the council, an 8-foot berm will completely eliminate, with 4-foot bushes, will completely eliminate all sight, okay?
Not necessarily.
If it's uphill, okay? I mean, there's always an exception, okay? So, there's a cost to a berm. I think there's less cost to a buffer, 20-foot, 50-foot, 100-foot. You talk about adding cost, making it prohibitive, or at least dressing up the town. A berm that I brought the pictures in does more to protect the visual aspects of that. The second thing is, add what it's gonna cost in the future. Any charge we do should be put in a fiduciary account that's gaining interest, long-term interest. So if it's a 15-year bond, you put it in the bank for, with a 10-year note.
You did that on one of the last ones
Right.
because they were
Right.
calling about
So,
rent.
so exactly, Anthony's on point, but there's an escalating cost, but there should be an offsetting escalation of inflationary return on investment, okay? And back to investment bankers, Mike said investment bankers, absolutely. Every project in the United States is driven by investment bankers. And between investment bankers and the US Congress, these things are gonna move forward. So basically, we're wasting a lot of time here. And the Congress in Rhode Island will decide what they decide, getting the payoffs they get. So a lot of these conversations are very nice that I sit here and listen to. But investment bankers are in it for one thing, money.
You can't lose, that's rigged.
Exactly.
Just to
So you got-
the mic to the
So you
day.
know that. What'd you get mad about?
Please.
No, you were kidding.
I know, that's okay.
But just to comment to Ron's point about berms, okay? I would suggest that berms is a good word when you're fabricating terrain barrier. But I think the more appropriate word for solar, because of the display itself, I'm principally talking about photovoltaic panels, they need access to sunlight. And the way to block the view that would help us more than just the term berm would be appropriate use of terrain masking.
Right.
Terrain masking is something that the Army uses and on a site and all the services, because it is so effective all season long. So I'm just making a suggestion that we use that term terrain masking and discuss that in terms of the configuration, so the proposed configuration, add that to our master plan.
I think it's great. I love white pines, so if they put a 100-foot buffer of white pines, you're not looking through that. I'm a big white pine fan.
We have multiple opportunities for terrain masking.
Right.
Where your point of view or your position of Blake Stat array, so you cannot see it because of the terrain, which, as Ron pointed out, is not affected by seasonal changes, or, as you pointed out, Anthony, not affected by the site itself, resulting in burnt ground or erosion on and on, so it kind of, it's a hard terrain, you can't see through ground, so any way that should be enforced and utilized to describe what we're trying to accomplish here.
I think the current application would fall into that because of the topography of the property up there,
Mhm.
But when you have a flat property, obviously, it's pretty difficult to use that type of buffer. I think, the discussion from the council about the zone, though, I wonder if, did they make any recommendation to a zone that they wouldn't want to allow it?
No, they
Or
did
just
not
said
make
just
any
discuss it?
recommendations at all. They really just said,
Because I thought they kind of were leaning towards not having it in a business or a commercial zone. have a couple up there already on Route 6, and we're limited for commercial and GBM. So by putting them there, they were afraid that.
So what, Joe, in that regard, if they can't go in agricultural, because they're not farms, and they can't
Well,
go.
they're allowed all
just-
zones right now.
All right, and they can't go in the business zones, what zone do they go in?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the council was, I think, that they asked us to look at taking it out of certain zones. I think their thought process was, I think, believe that the commercial zone is getting used up with solar, and they thought that we don't have enough commercial property as it
Maybe we
is.
don't, and I said we don't have enough zones.
Yeah, I know that. That's something we can discuss.
All right, so
But,
can I make a motion that we send this back to the council as it is with Michael's, Michael, Helen, you have Michael's pretty much his verbatim, I know it's not verbatim, but you have his, you have
Have a recording.
recording, and send it back to the council with Michael's explanation. And I think at this point, they have Mike's terrain, they have berms, they have, this is now we've made a lot of recommendations, it's really in their pocket.
I think,
To make, I'm sorry, Ron, I'm just trying to clarify, to ask us to make those zoning changes.
No, what I'm saying is that at this point, we send this back to the council with Michael's explanation of how everything's covered, and that's it. So I'm making a motion, if I can get a second, then we can, well, so,
Get a second.
yeah.
Get a second. Ron, motion.
Well,
Can I have a second for discussion?
Sending it back to the council the way it is, with Mike's explanation.
but is that enough, Mike's explanation?
Well, if you want a second, if you don't want a second, if nobody wants a second.
Second it.
Does anybody want a second the motion?
I'll second the motion, but can I make a comment first?
Well, he has a motion, there's a motion on the floor, so you have to second it. Then we
So then
have
you
discussion.
can make the comment.
Okay.
Then we have discussion. Okay, discussion.
While we're all thinking about what we don't want to do, or what nobody wants to have this, or they want to make it so it's harder for them to get it, we need to think about the homeowner.
What?
The homeowner, the guy that owns the land, the guy that's been paying taxes on it. Farms aren't coming back, they're gone, okay? Business isn't coming anytime in the near future. What are you gonna do for these guys that are going broke paying taxes on a piece of property? That have been residents of Foster for, who knows how long? What are you gonna do for him?
So what are you saying?
I'm saying you can't ace this guy out of anything that he can possibly do with his own land.
We're not even making any changes, right now it's allowed, and Ron suggested to send it with just some explanations that
And in that line,
the current
And in that line,
ordinance
what I was gonna
covers
say
our
is-
ability.
the zoning is still what you have to do. If you just want to bury these things on the lots that are buried like between 101 and Route 6 that have got no access, fine. Do that. There's a lot of land back there that has no access. Put them on those lands, if that's what you want to do. All right? And get them off of Route 6. I can agree that you don't want them in your prime, what might one day be prime commercial property. I would say that's a truism. All right? And if you hide them enough, then nobody's going to really care. All right? But you're not going to hide one. That piece of property on 101 is a prime example. You're not going to build a house there. There isn't anybody in their right mind, a contractor, that will ever build a house there. Which means that guy's got nothing to do with that land. No house, no business, no farm, no nothing. Just pay taxes. Okay? I don't think we should do that to these people.
Well, the landowner on that particular piece of property, Jeffrey, sold it, okay, to the investment people from Newport. So
And-
they could come here and do what they wanted to do.
Yes.
It wasn't like the poor landowner owned that land for so long and he's gonna put a solar farm on it. He sold it. So
He
he
sold,
made
but
his
the
money.
only way he sold it was to get a solar farm on it. Well, so they could put a solar farm.
But then that piece of property falls on the brown land, like I said. You can't do anything with it.
Yes.
So that would be an ideal spot, wouldn't it, for a solar farm?
Not the people who live there, don't think.
All right,
That was my.
But then you put a berm up, and they can live with it.
Yeah.
but I don't think the ordinance prohibits anybody from doing anything on the property at this point. I think that we're trying to make the point, I think Ron's point was that, from what Mike had said, that our ordinance does give us the ability to put conditions on these applications to prevent, so we could have berms or buffers or setback, and we can add conditions to the application right from the start. I mean, we can put it in the ordinance, but like you said, every property and every application isn't the same. So it depends on the type of property it is, what the layout of the land.
Exactly, where they're gonna put it, how it's gonna go
Right,
up.
so, we gotta, I think everything is in the ordinance to give the town the ability to do it. I think with our experience that we've had from having a few in the town that we learned from, we should be
So do we
learning
put the
from what has
ordinance,
happened.
let me ask you a question, did we put the ordinances in after that one went up? Or were the ordinances in
The ordinance
place?
was there.
So why
We
is it
didn't, we
limited?
didn't properly apply what the abilities we had.
Which one are you talking about?
Okay.
106.
The one I'm gonna say.
And some of the conditions were not met, and they did things they weren't supposed to do. And once we make a decision, as we've talked about before, it's out of our hands. Basically, it goes to the zoning official, and that's their authority. So they're supposed to make sure that what's on that plan is done.
If the zoning official.
But when you
doesn't
cut,
do that-
100-year-old trees, it's like, once they're cut, it's kind of hard to say, well,
Put it back.
now how are we gonna fix this? We can't plant 100-year-old trees. So the best thing we could do is try to make them
Shouldn't the council have stepped in
Yeah.
and told the zoning, the official there to go straighten it
I
out?
think, there was a lot of bad things. I know there was.
So the council didn't do anything?
There was no, I don't think anybody on the planning board was happy with what happened up there. No.
There were.
We were very surprised.
We,
Could we call the question?
Sure.
Recognize first.
Collins, we got some discussion.
There were a couple of, I agree on finding out a little more specifically what the council would like. But I do think that we could definitely, make recommendations on, larger setbacks. Anthony's idea of putting pines, white pines, as a requirement that we, a lot of the things that we have required for towers, we could easily put into the.
That's why I'm here.
Do a great job.
And so, but I do have a question, and that is asking people,
Sorry.
asking, do you remember people who were here on the one on 101, on the installation on 101? That company, I believe, had some kind of a deal with another town, like West Greenwich or North Kingstown or something like that, so that the other town was getting some kind of benefit from putting the solar farm here.
They actually got to use some of their electricity, right?
It had to do, well, I think actually.
West Greenwich.
Was it West Greenwich? Do you remember? And why can't we, if they can do that, if another town could do that? Is that something that the state regulates?
Yes.
If the.
Yeah, probably ISO regulates it too, right?
ISO and the utility regulate that.
You could say you get it, but
Yeah, we're always looking for income and.
Should we just amend the motion to include the specific items that Anthony
Do you
suggested?
want to make an amendment with the comments that Helen made?
I think that would be appropriate, and that would put some teeth into the intent, which is to strengthen the ordinance and make it more restrictive.
Yeah.
I think everyone is saying, we don't want to prohibit development, we don't want to damage anyone's potential for a sale of property or increased revenue, but in fact, common sense dictates that our restrictive or conditions that we find, that we apply as restrictions are meaningful. And a 20-foot buffer as opposed to a 100-foot buffer. And so I think adding a motion to add the comments that we've made on those three issues. Helen, you have three there, right? You want to read those to all?
We
of us
didn't get
again?
through the list, excuse me.
Yeah.
Did we get through the list?
Yeah, I think that
It was,
should refer to the list, yeah.
It was prohibited certain districts, increase the required vegetative buffer, add additional requirements for bounding, landscaping, et cetera,
That-
create maximum coverage in certain districts, were the first four, are the ones that are directly applicable to the ordinance.
So, what's the motion?
Well, I have a motion.
The amendment.
Right now, there's
He wants to
one
amend.
pending, but I think you want to clarify, are you going to send this back to the council and say, well, maybe we can do this stuff, tell us what you want to do, or, but.
Well, I think, obviously, we have some ideas here.
So if you want to use those ideas and incorporate them into the ordinance, Jennifer can do that, and then we
Yeah.
can come back.
Well, yeah, I think that, obviously, this is not something we're gonna do in one night.
They seem to want it on November, according.
Could can I read the letter that I sent to you and Joe?
Oh, he's a town council member.
Go figure.
So you sent a letter to me?
I
You
sent a letter I sent an email on October 1st. May I do that, Joe?
No,
Is that-
that-
get attacked while you speak.
Is that, okay. Jennifer, at the September 27th Town Council meeting, a motion was made that the planning board review the current solar farm ordinances to modify and/or make additions. We would like the board to consider concerns that have been brought forth by various citizens during the planning board and town council meetings regarding solar farms. We would like the results to be available for the November 8th council meeting. Thank you in advance for this. I know this is a huge undertaking. Denise L. DeFranco.
And I had mentioned that when we put it on future agenda items, that we received that from them when they had their council.
We should have got it.
It was
all
an
should-
email. It wasn't-
correspondence.
It's not, yeah. Well, we had told you
Okay.
what was in it. I mean.
We're having a discussion here.
Right, and we had told you that they recommended that we review it, and that's why it's on the agenda tonight.
Okay,
And it was mentioned at that meeting,
all right.
So,
when it was put on the agenda.
so what we just spoke about is more
Instead
than
of
we
a
had.
moratorium, they wanted us to do this instead.
Right, but I think that they are looking for actual changes within the ordinance, or no change at all. So that would be not, well, we can consider these, tell us what you think. So if you want to talk about the additional landscaping, the landscape performance bond, adding that stuff in, I think that was, I mean, it's probably pretty easy to drop it in our ordinance as is.
Can I say one more thing?
As
Stop
a
me
member of the public?
Yes.
as a member of the public. Sitting here as a member of the public for many meetings where you discuss the solar farms. In the beginning, we were all naive as to what was to be expected. And yes, Route 6 is a good example of that. What was not included, what we needed to be aware of, make sure that the zoning official is there for X, Y, and Z. We now know all those things, and I think that's what we were looking at least I as a,
Member of the public.
as a member of the public, was looking at for you to review and to see, do we need to add more to it, or is there enough in there and we just have to look at
All
it?
right, right now you have a motion on the table to
Right.
send it
Mike
back as
was
is.
asking
Are you
to
going
make it
to make an
amendment.
amendment?
Right, I asked for an amendment. If you want, we could
So we're still
amend
in
it,
discussion.
or we could, yes.
Yeah.
We have to either vote on the.
You have to vote on my motion to
Or
make
make
an
an
amendment,
amendment.
or ask me to remove my motion. One of the, please do
That's a
something.
question. Under the conditions, I mean, the ordinance setback, can we just say we want 100 feet?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
All right,
Is that
cool
what
with that.
you want, is that what you want to do?
Well, what I'm saying is if we have that, I didn't know you could do that. I thought it's a 20, you're stuck with 20.
You know, you can't start adding more. You can suggest to change it.
Oh, well, I would
But
say
you-
make it 100.
You can't just tell the applicant, oh, it's just try to go like.
Well, that's what I, yeah, that's what I'm
Right,
afraid
we
of.
have to-
Well, I think
yeah.
we should change it to 100.
Well, actually, Mike had a word suggestion which gives us a lot of leeway, okay? Lawyers like to not tie things down. They like a lot of leeway, right?
I feel like
Shake
the
their
terrain.
head, right?
I like that word.
Terrain, see, that covered a lot of stuff, terrain.
But what if you can't do a terrain?
Well, terrain, if terrain is uphill, and we say we don't want to have visual terrain, well, then they gotta put it on the other side of the hill.
Well, they can't put
You
it-
need, well, give me a legal word, stretchability, right? That's not a legal word, okay? But
Flexible.
yeah, flexibility, okay? Nailing this down between 20 feet and 100 feet is the absolute wrong thing to do, okay? Whether it be a bird or Michael's worm, land, whatever, just a word and leave it flexible, please.
Do we have a standard of visibility?
Yeah, none, we shouldn't see it.
I agree.
No.
We should have the flexibility of each individual, okay, parcel that they're gonna put up, or a solar farm, or whatever you wanna call it. We should have the flexibility to control the visual appeal of it, okay? The last one came and had nice, it looked like Roger Williams Park, but that was never gonna be done, okay? But I think we should have the flexibility to control what they're gonna put there, and how they put it there. I mean, some piece of property, a 20-foot berm might work,
Yeah.
because it's so dense or whatever's there. And another one might not work.
Okay, so I'm gonna amend my motion, okay? That we take out the words 20 feet, and we use Michael's, please, Michael, again, because I'm not that smart.
Terrain management.
Terrain management, or what was it?
Terrain
Masking, masking, there you go. That we take out 20 feet, and we use terrain masking. Now I have an amendment on the floor. Can I have a second?
Hang on. Did you want to say something before?
So you can't really just take out 20 feet and throw in terrain masking, because that really doesn't set any guideline for them. I would add terrain
Okay,
masking rather
thank
than
you.
remove.
Good, thank you. Then my amendment is to add terrain management to 20, masking
Terrain,
to
I would
20 feet.
say terrain masking as required by
Please.
the board.
Please,
As required.
give
Yeah.
me my motion, will you, my amendment? What is it?
To add that the board can impose a condition of
Terrain
terrain
masking.
masking to their, at their discretion,
Good.
something along those.
That's my amendment. Do I have a second?
To add a condition of
Terrain
terrain masking.
To the 20.
A second.
All right, second by Brad.
I think that,
We have more discussion.
I'm so sorry, I think that the person who originally,
You're correct,
that Jeff was the person who seconded the original amendment, so Jeff would be, I believe, be the
Second.
person to second that, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a second discussion. All right.
Okay, and let me make sure that I have this right.
Oh, boy.
Ron amended his motion to add the condition of terrain masking to be as deemed appropriate by the planning board to
Flexibility.
to the zoning.
Okay.
All right, so we got an amendment in a second. All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Okay, 7-0. Okay, back to the main motion. I just have one clarification to indulge.
Yep.
You're saying that we don't have, from this ordinance, we don't have the ability to put conditions on buffers as far as adding to that 20 feet, as far as, if we said we wanted more.
To
that's what the
change
lawyer
the
said.
ordinance.
That's what you said, that you can't add to buffer.
So you
If
can't
they
say
meet
to
that
an
20
applicant,
foot
it says 20.
Vegetated
you
buffer,
can't
we
say.
can't say they have that more. And they have to meet the setback.
How about if
Can
we
we
could-
change the ordinance?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so we can't, if the ordinance says 20 feet,
You could change it to 100.
You
then
can.
we can't
The
require
town
more.
council
But
can.
if the ordinance says 100 feet or
I
whatever,
think that gives us more flexibility.
then
We can always make
just
it less
to
if we start
clarify
high.
that.
Well, I don't know if you can.
No, you can't.
No, you
No?
can't, no,
In other words, if it's at 100, we can't tell them 20 works.
no.
Yeah, that's right.
You
You got a
Yeah.
1 acre parcel and you make a 100-foot buffer. Now what?
Geez, I guess
Okay.
you can't put it on.
Well, that, if we don't want them, that's great.
But that's why if you talk about this terrain masking, that gives you a lot of flexibility to say, okay, well, you know, you can have a 20-foot buffer, but you need to put an 8-foot.
Okay.
Okay,
And
okay,
so then
okay.
they might say, what if we give you a bigger buffer?
Okay,
And
okay.
that,
As
so.
long as we have that flexibility, that works great.
But that landscape bond is something else you guys talk about, and that's in my opinion, that's probably extremely beneficial, and you might wanna put it right in there so that they know and they come to the table with it, rather than you saying, well, now you need another $100,000 bond.
Put it right in.
That would be,
So landscape.
I make a motion, we put it,
we need to make a motion
The
for that.
amendment,
The
Okay,
amendment-
so far, we've made the motion for terrain masking, right?
yeah.
Yes,
Okay, and that's all
No,
so far. We
right.
haven't talked about landscaping
Bond.
or bonding.
The landscape.
We're doing one at a time?
Well, I think we just said
Well, we
landscape,
can
landscape
amend it
bond.
so it's included in the.
landscape bonding.
yeah,
All right, so Anthony, you want to make a motion to add the landscaping bond?
I make a motion that we add landscaping bonding to the ordinance.
Second.
All right. So
Is
that's
there a
it.
motion on the floor already?
I'm confused now.
This is an amendment to this motion, or do you want to make a separate motion?
I'll make an amendment to that motion, so.
Okay, all right.
I make an amendment to the motion, we gotta get it
Yeah,
technically
yeah,
right now.
okay, okay, and seconded by Ron.
Ron,
Okay, any discussion?
Does that allow us to control how transparent it is? I mean, is it block the view?
yeah.
It does?
Well, the terrain masking will allow you to do that, and the performance bond, the landscape performance bond will.
But we're relying just on landscaping.
Well, the flexibility will do that one.
Yeah, the terrain masking is gonna allow you to say how much visibility. But then you can tell them, well, you need to plant X, Y, and Z,
But you gotta maintain them, I mean, you can't just
but
plant.
that's
that's
why
what
the
the
bond
bond is
would be
for.
there, so.
But that's only limited to 2 years?
Well, that's the thing, how many years do you want? I would say that maybe you wanna just take back the initial motion, and then we can.
I know, that's getting messy now.
Yes.
It's getting messy.
A single, will a single bond last forever, or are you gonna recurring bond?
It depends what you want, you can put whatever you want in there. I think the last time we said, I don't know, 12 months after the installation.
I got an idea. Anybody is willing to.
listen, I'm willing to do anything. I'm willing to do anything. This is why,
All right,
this
so
is
we
why
got-
we have to operate by Roberts.
Well, if we got these things, all right, why don't we have the plan and put this all together in a neat package for the next meeting? And have it all in the letter with all the things that we want to go to the council and we'll vote on it there. And then it'll all be laid out for us.
But Joe, do you wanna have it in a letter or a red line of the,
No,
of the old
The
ordinance? I
ordinance,
think
right,
that's,
in
yeah.
the ordinance,
Yeah.
what, the
Okay.
things that we want to send to them for recommendations to change.
And we can also
And then we'll
include
look at
Mike's.
that, so we see what we're doing, you know,
Okay.
as a complete thing.
Mhm.
The only thing is, I
Our
don't know
next
if we'll
meeting
meet.
is the 7th.
Okay,
Well, we have a meeting yet, yeah. We have
so
a
you
meeting.
do have a
before that.
meeting.
Yeah, so we
Okay.
have a meeting the
It's
7th,
fine.
and
It's
we
a
will
work
make
meeting.
sure that it's on the town council's agenda.
And
We'll notify them that they'll have it.
That sounds perfect.
also, at the council meeting, I told them that we will report back at that meeting, and I will give them what we have so far. So we're not complete. That's what I told them at the meeting, they were okay with that, so we're not, we don't have
Yeah.
everything done. What do you think, everybody?
Absolutely.
We got something, I think it's easier that way.
So Ron,
You
why
want
don't
to
we
withdraw
draw
your
your-
motion?
Absolutely.
Okay, withdraw your
Okay,
second,
so-
yeah.
Excuse me, we need to have.
And then we'll make a motion.
We need to have Anthony withdraw.
God, are we making progress?
And Ron
I
withdraw.
don't know. Sounds like football, back and forth.
I can't withdraw my.
We'll catch it in the Senate.
Absolutely.
No, here you gotta
You're
remember.
first, and now we have to have Ron and Jeff withdraw their motion.
Withdraw your.
Yeah, okay, that's all.
I withdraw.
I withdraw my
All right, so we're just gonna let the planner take the notes.
Take all this information
The
and,
part-time planner.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I will listen to this recording, let me tell you.
Take the chaos and organize it.
You gotta listen to it again.
Probably.
Okay, so we got.
One second, before we move on to the next topic, I'd like to address the resident in the audience.
Yeah, like 20
When you said the first,
20 feet plus.
we didn't know anything on the first solar farm that went in. I was there, I knew everything about the solar farm, and presented it to the zoning board, and the zoning board looked at me and said, I was crazy, and then they got what they had. So I think it's very important that your boards are on point, okay? And not just from a whim,
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think,
okay?
yeah, I know that there was.
Just want to get it out there.
Moving on.
Well, you
Appreciate
know what happened on your side, the same thing happened on Route 6, they didn't do what they were supposed to do back there also. So, obviously, they sold the property to another developer. Anyway, all right, so we're all set on that, we don't need a motion to do that.
No.
To bring that to the next meeting, and then we can look at it and get it ahead of time.
Do the next easy one.
Next easy one, what's the next easy one?
Marijuana.
Yeah, we don't have anything on marijuana.
It's on the agenda, but nothing in the back.
Yeah, that's what I said. How that-
We can go. When did you retire?
August 18th.
Required vegetated buffer. We can
Enjoying it.
use Marijuana. plants. Put them in front of that.
I make a
But the
motion.
chair like that, they're leading.
I don't know, who's it?
Yeah, keep moving.
No wonder why they walk over.
All right, so the next thing is the marijuana ordinance. I don't see anything on that, on our, in our packet, Jennifer, so what's going on?
So
there?
what's going on with that? The town council has asked me to look at making some changes, and I have gotten some input. I've listened to all the comments that were given at the public hearing of the town council, and I had a discussion with the police chief and the building inspector, and let me see. I started writing it, but I can bring it to you. Yeah, I can bring it to you, so just some of the things that were an issue. One thing that John Restivo brought up, which was a good call, is that he had mentioned that you had proposed to allow compassion centers by right in the commercial area, and not by special use permit for the licensed cultivator. And the thing is that compassion centers can be cultivators as well. So she was just saying, if you're gonna allow a compassion center, then you should just allow a licensed cultivator. That made sense to me. The other concern was, one of the major concerns was that if you make it a special use permit for any of them, that people are going to know where it's located, and that was an issue. Because you would have a public hearing, and everyone would know, and it might be a safety issue. So that's something that just has to be dealt with. We thought about not making any special use permits and only permitting it in certain places and prohibiting it in other places, and then making additional regulations, like a whole other supplementary regulations, which is what I was writing up, about informing the police chief that it exists and things like that. And there are business regulations, over 100 pages, and I found out that they are now licensed non-residential cooperative cultivation and licensed residential cooperative cultivation. So now they're required to be licensed as well, and then they're required to tell the state police, and I'm just going through all that so that people feel comfortable if they're permitting something, that it's going to be regulated by the state police. And maybe, even though it's in these regulations, we'll put them in the ordinance so people know that they have to go do these things.
Jennifer, is a license a tax?
I called, I was,
No, you're just being funny.
Yeah.
but I'm gonna tell you that I called the medical marijuana Department of Business Regulation. They didn't get back to me, but I'm gonna see if we can charge, if the town can charge for a license.
Well,
I don't know, but
We
you
don't
don't
need
think
money.
they can,
We
but-
do not need money. We do not want any more money.
So Jennifer, you're working on this,
So I'm working on it, but those are
And-
some of the issues.
so when we have a draft ordinance, I think it would be better that we get a draft ordinance together before we spend too much time discussing it.
Sure.
If there's anything anybody thinks should be included in it, you know, you
What-
can contact Jennifer if you want to say anything tonight, you're welcome to.
No, what I'd like to see, Jennifer, when you compile that, I'd like to see that on paper so we can review it, all right? You know, and then we'll make comments on what you produce. Thank
Has
you.
anybody ever applied yet for any of that stuff?
Oh, well, first of all, you know, the compassion centers, there's only 3, but there was a law that didn't get passed, but it was proposed to make 13 additional ones, so that's something you do have to think about. Licensed cultivators, they only opened up the licensing for 3 months last year, and they don't have any more openings, but you need to have, when they go for a license, they have to say it's okay with zoning, like in their application. So you kind of have to have
Any
it set
license for
somewhere.
it?
You need a license for it, for all of it.
Not that I'm versed in
You
this, is
listen.
there any way where this town's gonna make a
Yeah,
couple
the
bucks
law.
on this deal?
Well, that's what I'm called, that's why I called.
Taxes on that stuff.
There's tangible, well, it's mostly farm.
Up
I
against-
mean,
Till they cut it down.
So that's
some
a
of the
done.
marijuana, but
up
the
against-
supplies, the lights.
The lights,
the
that's-
lights are all tangible.
But if we don't know where they are, how can we catch them?
Yes, I know, yes, well, that was an answer.
That's kind of.
Somebody else is gonna have to.
People are gonna find out anyway.
Yeah, I just don't, you know,
And
that's why I don't.
Not me.
it's kind of hard to say you don't want to regulate them, but you do want to regulate them. It's kind of.
I don't know, I think, you know, things are gonna be built in a world to keep commercial, you know, like fashion centers, people are gonna know about it anyway. Especially using a business on something isn't gonna make
Right.
it any more obvious, people are gonna know what it is.
Right.
Okay, so I'm still putting that together.
Okay. I think that was that. So, no further comments, we'll go on to last thing, right? What was that, the
Subdivision, state subdivision.
So this is something that we need to, just to be in line with the state laws.
Can I rumble about this? I know that there's a point in it, but in making these changes by the state, which has got a whole full-time planning, bureau, and all these larger towns which have planning offices with all these, people working for them, to make those requirements for a, small town with a part-time planner and et cetera, is just unreasonable.
It was very hard fought, a lot, the association of planners, a lot of people came and objected to it.
Can we sue them?
Initially, they did want to put like a fine in, like if it wasn't done, you had to give them half of the application fee back. So at least that got removed, but it was pretty hard fought there were a number of small towns that were represented. Planner
For
association.
whatever good that did, which is to say, which
Well, they took out the fine.
They did take out the
They took
fines,
out.
yeah.
I have a question on it. I understand that it's per statute, you just made all the changes.
Right.
I did have a question on, when you go to extend it, I guess it's you can extend it 2 times, possibly even 3, but it says it has to be done at the annual review, and the statute says it is. And what is the annual review? Is that something standard that happens at the end of the year, or?
I don't know where you.
Okay, I highlighted it either, but,
But which vesting?
it's probably in both of them.
Yeah. I think it would be the 1-year anniversary.
That's what I kind
Yeah.
of, that seemed to make sense, but with it, I mean, is there scheduled an annual review? Or does they all get reviewed at the end of the year, or it's just?
Yeah, it says that in the statute, that's how.
It does say it in the
Yeah.
statute, yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Silently, it's
Which- Can we write-
You can
Can we
write
write
the 1-year anniversary, but, or you, well, it's not just 1 year, because it's 2 extensions. You, for
So they weren't required to do that previously?
You were only
The law
allowed
went
1
into
year
effect.
vesting, and one time you could ask for a 1-year extension. Now you can ask, now it's good for 2 years, and you can ask for 2 extensions that are 1 year,
Yeah.
4 years instead of
When
2.
they were working on it, it was automatic, they kept.
So that's the same rules,
That's
Yes.
the
and we
secret.
have to abide by it.
yes.
And so there's, I think all we're doing here is just informing us that this change is about to be made, because
It's
Well,
already
it's
been
already
made.
active, and our
Yeah, so
ordinance is just not up to date with that.
so what
Do we
what
have-
we're supposed to do is change our subdivision regulations.
Yeah.
Which actually takes a little bit of, you have to advertise it and have a hearing. I just wanted to let you.
The
Oh, well,
planning
no,
board does that.
the
though.
planning
The
Planning board does it, planning board does.
Subdivisions don't.
Planning,
do
that's
planning.
correct. It's
Yeah,
completely
correct.
the
It's
planning
not
board, no
correct.
town council.
But the state law still.
Yeah,
It
it's
supersedes
Yeah.
it,
It's
so
all,
I have to
so,
know
you know,
anyway.
yeah, so it does, it's not gonna make a difference, and we have to abide by this
Yes.
either way.
Either
So
way,
it's
yeah.
not something we have to do right away.
So are you gonna make the change as of the anniversary date, or just leave it as the annual review with the
Well,
understanding
it's
that
a
that's?
state law, I think you just leave
Yeah,
it.
but if there is no annual review, I mean,
Well,
so there's a
You don't
state
have
law,
to.
but they ain't one.
but I think we have to get on the fly.
From anniversary,
Yeah,
year,
that's what
annual anniversary, instead of review?
At the end of the,
It says,
You were holding out on me, Helen.
who must.
Yeah, just because last
Yes.
year,
We didn't have any
they
luck by read the whole senior video.
You could say
Let's go
for
and
each
get another cookie and
annual
we'll have to-
request, or for each annual review request,
Each annual.
well, they must
Review
appear to
request.
request the extension.
right.
So,
I mean, I don't want to stray too far.
who must appear before the planning board to make this request?
So even annually in the first 2 years, they still have to come in during the first 2 years.
Do they have to come to the board, or do they go
I think
Yeah,
they can
that's
have
what
a
they-
written,
request.
written request.
to the
So it would
planning
be
board?
correspondence, probably,
Yeah, okay.
something.
No,
No, who it says,
It says
it
before
says
the
written.
board.
before the board.
Before the planning board, yeah.
It doesn't
For
say.
the annual review.
Upon written request by the applicant, who must appear. So they have
It says
to write.
that.
And if they don't,
Yeah.
if they don't request it, what happens? Is it not extended?
Well, you
Or is it
wouldn't
right?
get it, so I think the request obviously is to get it on the agenda.
So they have to,
So it's, the onus is on them.
right.
And so if they don't, within that 1 year period, that.
Yes.
They're-
Yes.
Yeah, they have to, they don't do it. Go ahead, Mike.
So this is strictly administrative, okay, and for the benefit of all of us. Do you still have that Excel spreadsheet for?
From the last meeting?
Fees?
No, I mean, we.
Last meeting,
Well-
Jennifer did bring it.
Yeah. I guess what we, if we're going to do this, There's an administrative burden that we're not budgeted for at this point, which is the access to produce that Excel spreadsheet. So again, I'm just being pragmatic here, I'm just saying, this is a workload, rightly highlighted by Helen's comment. There are considerable there are probably 50 applications pending right now.
50? No, I don't think.
There's the sheet, yeah.
Okay, this is what I'm referring to.
Yeah,
This is the
Jennifer
Yes.
brought
Okay.
this last
Thank you. I just wanted, again, this is just administrative. Is everybody familiar with it? Okay. We don't get it in our packet.
Now, I think going forward.
This is
So,
something we're gonna start doing.
Really good, yeah.
This is the last meeting.
I think along with, obviously having to make the change in the subdivision regulation, we should also make a budget request to the council to keep us out of trouble, because there is no provision for the time and money it takes to do this stuff. I mean, we're now up.
Yeah,
We could be called to task if we don't do what the state regulation says.
Oh, totally.
So it's an insurance policy, it's not money, it's not a frivolous expense, it's not a, but it should be definitely in the budget that we try to control, simply because we don't want to assume the liability and the risk along with the state law, which I think was hard fought because of that. It does significantly increase the administrative burden of the planning department.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's
Exactly,
one,
it
just
does.
administrative comment, perhaps the appropriate time to address that would be when you, we're gonna have a public hearing on this, right?
That's true.
Okay.
Well, you have to address it
Okay.
if we have the availability to have our own licensing fees, that's where you would cover them.
Exactly,
Those-
Ron,
those
exactly,
ones.
I tie it right to it, absolutely.
I have to say, I kind of
Gotta
joked
come up with
with
the dough
this
somewhere
tax.
to do this. You know,
True.
we're always robbing Peter to pay Paul, and, you know, we prioritizing stuff, sitting on a deadline.
I kind of joked with one of the sponsors and said, oh, now you're gonna have to hire a lot more planners because you're making
Well,
Well, a
more.
lot of kids graduate in URI and planning, so.
I heard there was a shortage.
Right. Moving
But,
on.
so I guess what I'm looking for the board is, do we want to go ahead and advertise this, make it public meeting?
You wanna do it right away? I mean, that's fine, whatever you wanna do.
It's up to you.
Yeah, we
If you
have to do
have,
it.
if we have, you know, a meeting,
Yeah.
you know, we can do it at our next business meeting
Okay, so I'll go ahead and,
at the end of November.
It's
I'll figure out how long you're
The
supposed to.
business is the first meeting, well,
Yeah,
she needs
business is
2
first.
I think
weeks.
you need,
I think it's gonna be 2 weeks, right?
I
I'm not
don't
sure.
know.
I-
They
it's
advertise,
not 3 weeks, is it 3 weeks?
is it 3 weeks
I'll have to
because
see
it's an
how-
amendment?
I'll have to see when it,
So the
It says
second
it
meeting,
here.
or are you gonna go to December?
I'll do it as soon as I,
Well, we can do it at the second meeting anyway, because it is kind
it's
of,
We'll
not
do it
that
one that we have the soonest.
it's not really a business meeting,
Soonest week.
because it's more
administrative,
administrative, you know, because it's
so I'll find
Yeah, it
out
works.
exactly
The sooner
how
the
many
better.
weeks. Okay,
well,
Yeah,
yeah.
So we get fined.
Right, we just gotta advertise it for 3 weeks, so we gotta have time to
Okay.
advertise.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a big deal.
okay.
I mean, it's kind of, I'm kind of bound by it anyway. It's just an amendment.
It's exactly 3 weeks.
We discussed that, are we done with this week?
Yes.
Are we done with, are we done with
Yeah,
this?
All right, so we're all set with that, we're just gonna set that up, so we'll move on to future agenda items, I believe, at this point, right?
I got some of it, but I think we
Okay.
should, if you want to put it on.
I don't know.
I want to discuss a traffic light at 6 in Cucumber, and the speed limit on 6. Reducing the speed limit on 6.
What is this? speed?
45, isn't it? Or 40?
45.
There is,
45.
I know there's regulations on speed limits or something, I remember, even Cucumber Hill Road, even though it says 35, they can't enforce it because the state requires the state road to be a certain speed.
100.
Well, I think 45 is almost a minimum speed up there. Something
No,
accepted in certain
my
intersections.
reasoning for the 40, to back it down to 40,
Yeah.
is they come off 395, the speed limit right there, 395, before the red light,
It's 40.
says 40. And then our speed limit, just before the gas station, says 45. So if they start speeding up, the thing is, nobody follows the speed limit.
We're all doing 70, so.
Okay.
some people are.
I mean, we could recommend it to the state, I just don't know what the state allows. They do have minimum speed limits on certain roads.
There's no discussion, this is a
No, I know.
future agenda.
But it's something we could do with, like we did with the signs on the other
Yeah,
roads. We put it
we
in.
give it to somebody,
All right, so we want to
read a
discuss.
letter out at the council,
Speed limits
the
and
speed limit is
and
definitely a red light at 300. And that would help.
Send it to the
What
board.
happened to the zoning? That, like,
It'll be,
because the town council's taking credit for that idea,
They should.
you know?
Well, we're just talking future.
I have a future
All right, so we got the
agenda.
light on 6 and the speed
we're
limit
gonna do the
and
the
the
licensing fees again, I'll bring
and the
that back.
commercial zone,
And the
right?
commercial zoning, yeah.
Right.
I have a future agenda.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd like to write a letter to the council, check with the zoning official, and if I'm correct, write a letter to the council that Carol Moreau's facility is not to code. As I told Mike Paolucci, you cannot run into a burning building to escape a fire, and she does not have 2 egresses. So there has to be a well and a door added to her facility downstairs to make that a usable space. So I will check with the building inspector. I know I was correct about building, and see, this is something that's gonna cost you money to do it right. So I will check with the building inspector, but right now, Joe, I'd like that on the future.
I'm not sure I'm clear what the agenda item is.
The agenda item would be that the planning board inform the council that Carol Moreau's space is illegal to code. And so I'm gonna check.
That's not necessarily the purview of the planning board.
But you see,
He's making a recommendation.
well, I'm making if it's not the purview of the planning board, who's Carol? Since
Zoning or building official?
So zoning or building official, so I'll talk to him and he'll
Yes.
take care of it?
Will you make a complaint to the,
All right, I'll make a complaint if that's what you
I
want.
guess that's how you, I don't know. I'm just going by what the solicitor said.
Chain of command, you're in charge. Hopefully.
So what? I think you would.
No, I'm taking your opinion on this. I don't understand what the planning board is thinking.
All right.
Anyway. Okay, so anything else, future agenda?
Now, I make a motion to adjourn, please.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Time is it, Helen? 8:48, what's the score?
I left my house at quarter
I
late.
was talking to Joe.